The fluorescent lights of the TJ Maxx buzzed like a swarm of bees, but I barely noticed. My hands trembled as I clutched a pile of mismatched clothes, each one a desperate attempt to piece together who I was. At 28, I still didn't know if I was allowed to exist as me, Elliot. Not quite man. Not quite woman. Just me. I stood outside the fitting room, my sneakers scuffing the linoleum floor of this suburban Maryland store. It was a Saturday, the kind of day where families swarmed the aisles, their carts overflowing with discounted dreams. I'd come here to find some anything that might make me feel less like a stranger in my own skin. My denim jacket hung loose on my frame, a shield against the world's judgment. But it wasn't enough. Not today. Not when every mirror felt like a courtroom. Need help with those? A voice asked, soft but steady, cutting through the chaos of my thoughts. I looked up and saw him, Sam. His name tag read. He was maybe early 30s, with dark hair cropped close and a smile that felt like a warm blanket on a cold night. His TJ Maxx polo was slightly wrinkled, but his eyes were sharp, like he could see right through the armor I'd built. Yeah, I stammered, clutching the clothes tighter, just trying to figure out what works. My voice cracked, betraying the nerves I'd spent years trying to hide. Sam didn't flinch. Instead, he tilted his head, studying Minute like I was a puzzle to solve, but like I was a person worth knowing. Let's get you a room, he said, gesturing toward the fitting area. His voice had a quiet strength, like he'd seen his own share of battles and come out the other side. I followed him, my heart pounding for reasons I couldn't name. The fitting room was a small, beige box with a single mirror and a flimsy curtain. It felt like a confessional, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to spill my sins. Sam hung the clothes on the rack, his movements deliberate. You don't have to pick something that fits someone else's idea of you, he said, almost too casually, as he adjusted a hanger. We're what feels right. His words hit like a thunderclap. I froze, my breath catching. How did he know? I'd spent my whole life trying to fit into clothes, into roles, into a world that didn't seem to have a place for someone like me. Growing up in a small town outside Baltimore, I'd learned early that being non-binary wasn't something you shouted from the rooftops. My parents loved me, but their love came with questions they didn't know how to ask. Why can't you just pick a side? My dad had said once, his voice heavy with confusion. I didn't have an answer then, and I still didn't now. Sam leaned against the wall, giving me space but not leaving. I've been there, he said, his voice low. Took me years to figure out who I was. Still working on it. Honestly. He tapped his name tag, a small gesture that felt like a confession of his own. I noticed the faint scar along his jawline, barely visible under the store's harsh lights. A story lived there, one he wasn't telling not yet. I started, then stopped, afraid to assume. Trans, he said simply. No hesitation. Took a long time to get here. TJ Maxx isn't exactly my dream job, but it's a step. Keeps me grounded. He smiled again, and I felt something loosen in my chest. Like a knot I'd been carrying forever was starting to unravel. I stepped into the fitting room, the curtain sliding shut behind me. The pile of clothes stared back at my button-downs. Sweaters. A pair of jeans that looked too bold for someone who'd spent years trying to disappear. I picked up a navy blazer, its fabric crisp and unfamiliar. It wasn't men's or women's, it was just a blazer. I slipped it on, my reflection staring back at me in the mirror. For the first time in years, I didn't hate what I saw. Looks good, Sam said from outside the curtain. I hadn't even realized he was still there. You've got an eye for what works. His voice was warm, not patronizing, and I believed him. I opened the curtain, and he nodded, like he'd known all along I could pull it off. We talked as I tried on more clothes, each piece feeling less like a costume and more like a choice. Sam shared bits of his story growing up in Virginia, coming out as trans in his 20s, the years of doubt and small victories. He didn't sugarcoat it, and I appreciated that. His honesty made me feel like I could breathe, like I didn't have to hide. By the time I left the fitting room, I'd picked out the blazer and a pair of boots that made me stand a little taller. Sam rang me up at the register, his hands quick but careful. "Come back anytime," he said, slipping my receipt into the bag. His fingers brushed mine, just for a second, and my heart did something I wasn't ready to name. As I walked out into the parking lot, the Maryland air cool against my skin, I realized I was smiling. For the first time in years, I felt like I could be minute perfect. Not fixed, but enough. That fitting room, that conversation, that fleeting touch, it wasn't just about clothes. It was about possibility. And I knew I'd be back. I couldn't stop thinking about Sam. The way he'd looked at me, not with pity or judgment, but with a quiet understanding that felt like a lifeline. By Monday, I was back at TJ Maxx, my new blazer folded over my arm like a talisman. The store was quieter today, the weekend rush replaced by the hum of retirees browsing clearance racks. I wandered the aisles, pretending to look at scarves while stealing glances at the registers. Sam was there, restocking bags behind the counter, his movements steady and unhurried. I wondered if he'd remember me. Part of me hoped he wouldn't. I wasn't sure I could handle the weight of being seen again. Back so soon. His voice caught me off guard, and I turned to find him standing at the end of the aisle, a stack of plastic hangers in his hands. That smile again, warm and disarming. I felt my cheeks flush. "Yeah. Needed a scarf." I lied, holding up a hideous green one I'd grabbed without looking. Sam raised an eyebrow, clearly not buying it. But he didn't call me out. "Let's find you something better than that," he said, setting the hangers down and leading me toward a rack of softer, earth-tone scarves. "This one's more your vibe." He pulled out a deep burgundy scarf, draping it over my shoulder with a gentleness that made my breath hitch. We talked again, this time about nothing and everything music. The best coffee shops in Baltimore. The way the city felt alive at night. Sam had a way of listening, really listening, that made me feel like my words mattered. I told him about my job as a graphic designer. The late nights spent tweaking logos for clients who never seemed satisfied. I didn't tell him about the nights I spent staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd ever feel whole. "You're an artist," he said, like it was a fact, not a compliment. "That's why you're so hard on yourself. You see the world in ways most people don't." I wanted to argue, to tell him I was just a mess trying to pass as functional. But the way he said it made me believe him, even just for a moment. He had to get back to work. But before he did, he scribbled something on a piece of receipt paper and handed it to me. "My number," he said, his voice low, "in case you need help picking out another scarf." His eyes sparkled with mischief, and I laughed, the sound foreign in my throat. That night, I sat on my couch, the receipt paper in my hand, my thumb hovering over my phone. I typed out a message, deleted it, typed it again. Finally, I hit send. "Hey, it's Elliot. Thanks for the scarf tip." Lame, but it was something. My phone buzzed almost instantly. "Anytime. You free Friday? There's a spot in the city you'd like." My heart did that thing again, the one I still wasn't ready to name. Friday came, and we met at a small cafe in Baltimore Station North, a place with exposed brick walls and mismatched furniture. Sam was already there, out of his TJ Maxx uniform, wearing a flannel shirt that made him look softer, more himself. We talked for hours, the conversation flowing like a river. He told me about his transition, the surgeries, the family who'd come around slowly. the ones who hadn't. I told him about the years I'd spent dodging pronouns, the way I'd learned to shrink myself to avoid questions. "You don't have to shrink anymore," he said, his hand resting on the table, inches from mine. Not with me. I wanted to reach for him, to close the gap, but fear held me back. What if this was too good to be true? What if I wasn't ready to be seen this clearly? As we walked out into the chilly night, the city lights blurring around us, Sam stopped and turned to me. "Elliot," he said, his voice steady. "You're allowed to take up space." Those words hit harder than I expected, cracking something open inside me. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, my eyes stinging. He didn't push, just walked beside me, his presence a quiet anchor in the storm of my thoughts. Weeks turned into months, and Sam became a constant in my life. We met for coffee, for walks along the harbor, for late-night talks on my couch. He was patient, never pushing me to be more than I was ready to be. But his presence was a challenge in itself, a challenge to believe I was worthy of this kind of connection. But it wasn't all easy. The world outside our bubble wasn't kind to people like us. One night, we were at a bar in Fells Point, laughing over a shared plate of fries, when a guy at the next table stared too long. "What's with the freak show?" he muttered, loud enough for us to hear. Sam's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away from me. "Ignore him," he said, his voice calm but firm. I tried, but the words burrowed into me, reminding me of every sideways glance, every whispered comment I'd endured. Later, as we walked to my car, I stopped under a streetlight. "Does it ever get easier?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Sam sighed, his breath visible in the cold air. "Some days. Yeah. Some days. No. But you learn to carry it differently." He reached for my hand, and this time, I let him take it. His fingers were warm, steady, and I held on like he was the only thing keeping me upright. Back at my apartment, we sat on the floor, a bottle of cheap wine between us. I told him about the first time I'd said the word non-binary out loud, how it felt like a key to a door I'd been afraid to open. He listened, his eyes never leaving mine. And when I finished, he leaned closer. "You're brave," he said, "braver than you know." I wanted to kiss him then, to close the distance between us. But fear still lingered, a shadow I couldn't shake. The next day, I went back to TJ Maxx, not because I needed anything, but because I wanted to see him in his element. The store was packed, and Sam was juggling customers with a grace I envied. When he saw me, his face lit up, and he waved me over. "Got a minute?" he asked, leading me to the break room. It was a cramped space with a vending machine and a table covered in coffee stains, but it felt like a sanctuary with him there. He pulled out a small notebook, its pages filled with sketches, clothes, outfits, designs that mixed masculine and feminine in ways I'd never seen. "I've been working on these," he said, almost shyly. "Thought you might like them." The designs were bold, unapologetic, like they were made for someone who refused to be boxed in. I realized then that he'd been paying attention, not just to me, but to the parts of me I was still learning to embrace. That night, I invited him over. We cooked dinner, burnt pasta, and a lopsided salad, but we laughed through it. As we sat on my couch, the air between us felt charged, like a storm about to break. "Sam," I said, my voice shaking, "I'm scared." He didn't ask why, just waited, giving me space to find the words. "I'm scared of wanting this. Of wanting you." He reached for my hand, his touch grounding me. "You don't have to have it all figured out," he said. "We can figure it out together." And then he leaned in, and I met him halfway. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, but it grew into something fierce, something that felt like coming home. Kissing Sam was like stepping into sunlight after years in the dark. It wasn't just physical, it was a promise. A declaration that we could exist in this world. Together. As we were. But promises are fragile. And the world has a way of testing them. We started spending more time together. Building a rhythm that felt both thrilling and terrifying. Sam would come over after his shifts. His TJ Maxx polo swapped for a soft hoodie. And we'd talk until the early hours. I learned the shape of his laugh. The way his eyes crinkled when he was teasing me. The quiet strength he carried like a second skin. But there were moments when I saw the weight he carried to the scars. Both visible and not. From a life spent fighting to be himself. One evening, we went to a local art gallery. A small space filled with queer artists' work. I felt alive there. Surrounded by people who didn't need me to explain myself. Sam held my hand, his thumb tracing circles on my skin. And for once, I didn't feel like I had to hide. But as we left, a group of guys outside catcalled. Their words sharp and cruel. Pick a side. Freaks. One of them spat. Sam's grip tightened. But he kept walking. His jaw set. I wanted to scream. To fight back. But fear glued my feet to the pavement. Back at my place, Sam was quiet. His usual warmth dimmed. I'm sorry, I said, not sure what I was apologizing for. He shook his head. It's not your fault, Elliot. It's just exhausting. He told me about the time he'd been attacked. Years ago, outside a bar in Richmond. The memory was raw. His voice steady but laced with pain. I held him then, my arms awkward but earnest. And he let me, his head resting against my shoulder. The next week, I decided to surprise him at work. I brought coffee, hoping to steal a moment between his shifts. But when I got to TJ Maxx, I saw him arguing with a customary middle-aged woman with a pinched face. Her voice loud enough to draw stares. You shouldn't be working here if you're like that, she said, gesturing at Sam like he was something to be ashamed of. My stomach twisted. But Sam stayed calm, his voice professional even as his hands shook. When the woman left, I approached, the coffee cold in my hands. You okay? I asked, feeling useless. He nodded, but his eyes were distant. Happens sometimes, he said, forcing a smile. You get used to it. But I didn't want him to have to get used to it. I wanted to protect him, to shield him from a world that didn't deserve his kindness. That night, we lay in bed, the moonlight spilling through my window. I traced the scar on his jaw, my fingers tentative. Tell me about this, I said softly. He hesitated, then spoke, his voice low. It was from the attack in Richmond, a reminder of a night he'd almost lost himself. But I'm still here, he said, his hand finding mine. And so are you. I kissed him then, fierce and desperate, trying to pour everything I felt into that moment. I wanted to tell him I loved him, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I held him closer, hoping he could feel it in the way I clung to him, in the way I refused to let go. Love is a word that feels too small for what was growing between us. But it was the only word I had. Sam and I were building something real, something that made the world's sharp edges feel softer. But love doesn't erase fear, and I was still afraid of losing him, of not being enough, of the world that seemed determined to break us. Spring came to Baltimore, the air warm and heavy with possibility. We spent weekends exploring the city, finding hidden bookstores and quiet parks where we could be ourselves. Sam started bringing his sketchbook everywhere, filling it with designs inspired by Usby, the way I moved, the way I laughed, the way I was learning to take up space. You're my muse, he teased, but his eyes were serious, and I felt a warmth I'd never known. But the world kept pushing back. At a Pride event in June, we marched together, our hands linked, rainbow flags snapping in the wind. The energy was electric. A sea of people celebrating who they were. But there were protesters too, their signs ugly with hate. One of them locked eyes with me, his voice booming through a megaphone. "You're an abomination." I froze, the words slicing through me. Sam pulled me close, his arm a shield. "They don't get to define us," he whispered, but the words lingered, a poison I couldn't shake. Back at my apartment, I broke down. What if they're right? I said, my voice raw. What if we're wrong? Sam knelt in front of me, his hands on my knees. "Elliot, look at me. We're not wrong. We're human. And we're here." His voice was fierce, unwavering, and I clung to it like a lifeline. The next day, I went to Maxx, needing to see him, needing to feel grounded. But when I got there, Sam wasn't at the register. His manager, a tired-looking woman named Linda, told me he'd called in sick. My stomach dropped. Sam never missed work, not even when he was exhausted. I texted him, but there was no reply. I drove to his apartment, a small place in a rundown building near the harbor, and knocked until my knuckles hurt. When he finally opened the door, his eyes were red, his face pale. "Sam, what's wrong?" I asked, stepping inside. The room was cluttered, sketches scattered across the table, but it felt empty without his usual warmth. He sank onto the couch, his hands in his lap. "Got a letter from my dad," he said, his voice hollow. "He wants to meet." After 10 years of silence, I sat beside him, my heart aching. Sam's dad had cut him off when he came out, a wound that had never fully healed. "What do you want to do?" I asked, taking his hand. He shook his head. "I don't know. Part of me wants to see him, to hear him out. Part of me wants to burn the letter and never look back." We sat there for hours, talking through the pain, the fear, the hope that maybe, just maybe, his dad had changed. I told him about my own family, how my mom had started using my pronouns after years of hesitation, how my dad still struggled but was trying. "It's not perfect," I said, "but it's progress." Sam nodded, his fingers tightening around mine. By the time I left, he'd decided to meet his dad. "Will you come with me?" he asked, his voice small. I didn't hesitate. Of course. As I drove home, the city lights blurring past, I realized I wasn't just falling for Sammy, was learning to fight for him. For us. For the life we were building together. The meeting with Sam's dad was set for a diner in Annapolis, a neutral ground that felt anything but neutral. Sam was quiet the whole drive, his hands twisting in his lap. I kept one hand on the wheel, the other on his knee, a silent promise that I wasn't going anywhere. The diner was a relic of the 50s, all chrome and red vinyl, the air thick with the smell of coffee and grease. Sam's dad, Robert, was already there, sitting in a corner booth. He was older than I'd expected, his hair graying, his face lined with years of regret. Sam stiffened as we approached, but he didn't let go of my hand. "Sam," Robert said, standing awkwardly. His voice was gruff, uncertain. "You look good." It was a clumsy attempt at kindness, but Sam's shoulders relaxed slightly. We sat, the table a barrier between past and present. I stayed quiet, letting Sam lead, my presence a steady anchor. They talked for hours, the conversation a minefield of old wounds and cautious hope. Robert apologized, his words halting but sincere. He'd been reading, he said, trying to understand. He didn't get everything, but he wanted to try. Sam listened, his face a mask of guarded hope. "I needed you 10 years ago," he said finally, his voice breaking. "Where were you?" Robert looked down, his hands trembling. I was wrong, he said. I was scared, and I let that make me cruel. I'm here now. It wasn't enough. Not yet. But it was a start. When we left, Sam was quiet, but he held my hand tighter, like he was afraid to let go. Back in Baltimore, life settled into a new rhythm. Sam started sketching again, his designs bolder, more confident. He talked about quitting TJ Maxx, maybe starting his own line someday. I encouraged him, my own work as a designer taking on new meaning as I helped him refine his ideas. We were building something together, not just a relationship, but a future. But the world wasn't done testing us. One night, we were walking home from a movie when a car slowed beside us. The driver leaned out, his voice slurred with alcohol and hate. Faggots. He spat. Throwing a beer can that missed us by inches. Sam pulled me into an alley, his body shielding mine until the car sped off. We stood there, hearts racing, the night air cold against our skin. I'm so tired of this, Sam said, his voice shaking. I just want to live. I held him, my own anger and fear mixing with his. We will, I said, my voice fierce. We're going to keep going. And in that moment, I knew I loved him, not just the idea of him, but the messy, beautiful reality of him. We went back to my place, the weight of the night heavy between us. Sam sat on my couch, his sketchbook open but untouched. What if it's always like this? He asked, his voice small. I knelt in front of him, my hands on his face. Then we fight. Together. He looked at me, his eyes searching, and then he kissed me, hard and desperate, like he was trying to believe me. Summer turned to fall, and our love grew stronger. But so did the challenges. Sam's dad reached out again, inviting us to dinner at his house. It was a tentative step, one Sam wasn't sure he was ready for. But he agreed, and I went with him, my heart in my throat. The dinner was awkward. Robert's wife trying too hard to make conversation. But there were moments of connect. Iona's shared laugh. A story about Sam as a kid that made him smile. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And that was enough for now. At work, I was thriving. My designs catching the eye of a local boutique. They wanted to collaborate, maybe even feature Sam's sketches in a collection. We spent nights brainstorming, our ideas blending into something new, something ours. But TJ Maxx was wearing Sam down. The customers, the comments, the constant need to prove himself, it was too much. One day, he came home with a bruise on his arm, a gift from a customer who'd shoved him during an argument. I'm done, he said, his voice flat. I can't keep doing this. I helped him draft a resignation letter, my hands steady even as my heart ached for him. He deserved more than this, more than a job that ground him down. We talked about his dreams, about starting a small business, about building a life where we could both be ourselves. It felt like a fantasy, but with Sam, it felt possible. Then came the call that changed everything. It was late, the kind of night where the city felt too quiet. Sam's phone buzzed, and I saw his face go pale as he answered. It was his dad, in the hospital, a heart attack. Not fatal, but serious. Sam was shaking as he hung up, his eyes wide with fear. I have to go, he said, already grabbing his keys. I drove him to Annapolis. The hospital, a maze of white walls and antiseptic smells. Robert was awake, weak but alive, his hand reaching for Sam's. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice hoarse. I want to do better. Sam nodded, tears streaming down his face. And I stood back, giving them space but never leaving. We stayed until morning. Sam curled up in a chair beside his dad's bed. I brought him coffee, my own exhaustion forgotten in the face of his pain. When we finally left, the sunrise was painting the sky in pinks and golds. And Sam looked at me, his eyes raw but clear. "I don't want to lose him again," he said. "Not when we're just starting." I took his hand, my heart full. "You won't," I said. "We'll figure it out." And I meant it not just for his dad, but for us, for the life we were building against all odds. Winter came, and with it, a sense of renewal. Sam quit TJ Maxx, his resignation a quiet act of defiance against a world that tried to break him. We started working on our clothing line together, a small collection of gender-neutral designs that felt like a love letter to everyone who'd ever felt out of place. The boutique loved it, and by January, we had a launch date. Sam's dad recovered slowly, and Sam visited him often, their relationship mending one conversation at a time. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it was real, and that was enough. I watched Sam grow stronger, his sketches bolder, his laugh louder. He was becoming himself, and I was falling deeper every day. One night, we stood on the roof of my building, the Baltimore skyline glittering below us. The air was cold, but Sam's hand in mine was warm, and I felt like I could face anything with him beside me. "Elliot," he said, turning to me, "you changed everything. That day in the fitting room, you saw me, and you let me see you." My throat tightened, the words I'd been holding back finally breaking free. "I love you," I said, my voice steady despite the tears in my eyes. Sam smiled, his eyes shining. "I love you too," he said, and then he kissed me, the city fading away until it was just us. Two people who'd found each other in a world that didn't always want us. The launch of our collection was a success, the boutique packed with people who saw themselves in our designs. Sam stood beside me, his hand in mine, and I realized this was what we'd been fighting for, not just acceptance, but the right to exist, to create, to love. The world wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and we were carving out a space in it, one stitch at a time. As we stood there, surrounded by our work, our love, our community, I thought back to that first day in the fitting room. A chance encounter, a moment of kindness, a spark that had grown into a flame. Sam had seen me when I couldn't see myself, and together, we'd built something beautiful. It wasn't the end of our story, it was just the beginning.